let me do a bit of intro. So I'm Victoria, and I'm the CEO of Tenspace, and everything that we do at Tenspace is all around employee engagement, hence the topic. It's around employee engagement, employee experience, and at the heart of what we do, we've built a tech platform that captures anonymous employee feedback. So a lot of the work that I do is working with organisations to really tap into what's happening with their teams at any particular point in time, and then what we can do to translate that into additional engagement, performance, additional retention. My background is as a HR director, so I worked for many years as HR director, big corporate startup scale-ups. The last role that I had before I set up Tenspace was heading up a mergers and acquisitions team for the UK's largest tech business, we were doing acquisitions in that role at a pace of 1 a month. So it's quite high volume, quite high kind of complexity in terms of some of the projects that we were managing. Now, from kind of a mergers and acquisition side, I was often doing that due diligence of kind of meeting new organisations, meeting targets, and giving thoughts and feelings around the team and the talent and the risk factors that are in there from a people perspective. And then I jump onto the other side of it, so trying to manage that kind of hearts and minds and integrating new businesses together. From a investment perspective, I've been through that process myself in Tenspace and use that investment to build our team, which is often where investment money comes in. And I've also, there's a lot of people in my network who have been through that investment process, and we've kind of talked about the impact that it's had on their businesses, and on their culture and on their teams. And I think why these things kind of couple together for me, mergers, acquisitions and investment, I think this is about periods of really high change in an organisation, periods where the stakes are high because somebody else is kind of looking at your business, I guess, because they've made an investment, or they've bought the business, or they've agreed to merge, and how we then transition out the other side of it. So in terms of some stats, all good webinar starts with stats, I'm sure you'll agree. So in 2022, there are around 290 mergers and acquisitions in the UK. I think this is quite conservative, actually, but probably what's that? Almost one a day, I guess. Maybe just more than one every work day in the UK. So, this is activity that happens often, and it's common. UK businesses saw £22.7 billion worth of funding in 2022 through investments. I think we know that the tax incentives are good to make investments in the UK, and we're well set up for investments into UK businesses. So, I run a tech startup myself, as I mentioned, and it will, almost daily I get contacted by somebody who wants to fling some money at me or make an investment in our business, which is great. So we know that there's a healthy market there. The scary stat that I wanted to share today actually was that 70 to 90% of mergers and acquisitions eventually fail after completion. So what a failure might look like might be that it failed to hit the potential of why it was built, of bought or invested in. Maybe the numbers didn't work. Maybe there was a total breakdown in terms of cultural, and the businesses didn't kind of mash together there. There's actually quite a high instance of when, particularly in acquisitions, where a merger will happen with an acquisition will happen, and then within quite a short period of time that business will get sold again, or where that business will get kind of broken down into kind of component parts that wasn't part of the plan in the first place, and that's usually because something fundamentally hasn't happened. And the work that we do at Tenspace and the work that I've done in the past, I can see absolutely why employee engagement is so important to making these types of transactions successful. And that's kind of what we want to talk about today. So, you know, employee engagement, why is this so important? Why am I going to kind of spend the next half an hour talking to you about it? So engagement can be so critical after a transaction. It really is a time when you need your best team performing at their best and delivering on their best potential. You know, these types of transactions, there's kind of a very clear promise often that's been made, where you know, we'll hit this number and this will happen, or you know, we promise to hit this number and X, Y, and Z will happen. So it's really important that we've got all those best people delivering at their best in order to make sure that we've got the best chance of delivering on those promises, or on the objectives of the transaction. And we know that high employee engagement leads to high performance. And I also can see in the data that we do, the work that we do, cranking up performance and just putting additional pressure on employees because you've been through this type of transaction, without doing the work around employee engagement and all the stuff that surrounds it, is a recipe for disaster. You know, if we've had some investment, and we've spent some of that on the sales team, they've got some more headcount, they've got a new shiny piece of tech, we can't then automatically just put 50% more on their targets and expect their performance to increase. It doesn't work like that. And again, that's where employee engagement really kind of has to underpin the work that we're doing. We often see an initial drop in employee engagement. That's totally normal. That's often about employees finding a new place in the world. It's about change management. It's, you know, all that kind of stuff, lack of psychological safety, uncertainty. It's all of that stuff that we naturally see a drop in engagement. Actually, if you are proactive about employee engagement and managing that through through over a period of time, we know that that recovery can happen, and that actually organisations can come out stronger at the back of these, out of the back. And here's what that might look like. So this is, I'm sure everybody's seen a change management curve before, but this really does kind of help in these, you know, like I said, I've done kind of high volume mergers and acquisitions, and mostly we do see that curve, and there might be some loops in it and some additional, you know, peaks and troughs, but in the main, we'll see that this kind of playing out. And, you know, when kind of people are at the start of the change curve, we might see some kind of, what it might look and feel like is people saying things like, this new business doesn't even know what they're doing. They aren't listening to us, and they're being disrespectful. Then we might say, even worse, I can't be bothered anymore. I'm just going to take my foot off the gas and see what happens. No one's noticing me anyway. And I think, you know, it's pretty obvious that we might see a dip in performance there. If we kind of keep going and we keep working through that change curve, coming out the other side, we might, you know, we start to kind of see some growth and some green shoots, and that's where we'll start to see things like, I've had an idea, maybe, you know, I might just see how this goes. And then actually coming out the top of the change curve, right, I'm absolutely flying again now. This, you know, this totally makes sense to me, and I'm absolutely flying. And the work that we can do with employee engagement and proactively managing employee engagement during this change curve is, we can speed up that change curve. We can speed up how quickly it takes people to go through that, you know, that negative cycle and come back out the other side. Because the quicker we can get people through that change curve, the quicker we can get them performing again, the quicker we can get their well-being back up, the quicker we can get their engagement up, the quicker that we can make that kind of acquisition a success, and we can start to pay back on the promises that we've made during that transaction. So what I thought would be useful to talk about is some of the really key things that that you might want to think about for your people plan during a transaction such as this. So having So let's start with communication. I think communication is always going to be at the heart of any transaction like this. And we often see when we do things like employee feedback surveys during these types of transactions, however much you have communicated, your employees will always tell you it's not enough. So you kind of almost need to like over-egg it almost. In terms of communication, the really key thing that employees are looking for from here is to, at least initially, is that question to be answered of what's in it for me. They don't care if the shareholders have got what they wanted. They don't care about, you know, the new location being offered or opened or whatever. They care about what's in it for me, and kind of the first part of that is, do I have a job usually, and kind of satisfying those concerns. But one of the things that I did when I was doing lots of acquisitions was using employee feedback surveys to check in on a regular basis. So when we've done a big piece of communication, for example, making sure that had landed, or having another feedback loop, which is number 2, making sure that you have got a really clear way that employees can share with you how they're feeling, or that you can test when stuff isn't landing well. So there'll likely be, in any kind of transaction, there'll likely be kind of key phases that you go through, or key objectives, or key stuff that changes. And you should have a really great communication plan in place normally to kind of support and lead those employees through it. And then what you need is that feedback loop in place that kind of says, right, I'm sat down opposite my employees, opposite my team, I've just delivered something to them. How does that feel? Or, you know, even I'm just making a cup of coffee in the kitchen, and you know, how do people feel? Obviously, the work that we do, we really advocate for anonymous employee feedback via surveys, because that can kind of sometimes draw out some of that stuff that employees don't feel safe in order to share any other way. But then once you've got that feedback, so it's about making that really clear, how employees can share their concerns, their ideas, stuff that you've missed, you know, and their feedback. And then creating that loop on it though. So to say, right, thanks for that piece of feedback, here's what we've done about it. And that's how we can really generate an employee voice during a time when employees can feel very, very out of control. Then number 3, so in terms of your people plan and areas of focus, thinking about vision, mission, values, goals. So often when we go through a transaction like this, the goals or the vision, the mission might have shifted. If we've merged, they might be merging into one. If we've acquired, we might have, our vision, mission, values and goals might get swallowed up by the larger organisation. You know, if we've got a big investment, it might be that's unlocked something and we're going on a bit of a different direction that we couldn't have before. It's really important that we kind of reset some of those things for our employees. And again, you might want to test some of this out. So to saying, you know, as you go through the period, the initial project and then out the other side, do my employees understand the vision, mission, values, goals? You know, do they understand the goals and how they can contribute to them, etc. And making sure that actually whatever happens, there's still that real clarity of direction of travel, even if that direction of travel has changed, and just making sure that there's that real clarity, so that everybody who's working really hard is working hard in the right direction and the same direction. Values, again, a bit like vision, mission, values, goals. Sometimes values can get eaten up, sometimes they can get merged together, sometimes they can kind of lose their way entirely. Values, when they're meaningful, can be a really great way of leading teams and cultures through periods of high change. And if you are changing values, or you're swallowing one set of values into another, making sure that you make the time to tell the employees the story about that can be really useful, because we often see some kind of cynicism maybe about what happened to the values, and it can feel quite personal sometimes if employees are really bought into one value set and that disappears. But used well, they can be really powerful tools to kind of drive through that change. So number 5, thinking about your people plan. So this is about recognition and performance management. So if you this really is about answering the question for people about, right, in this new shape of organisation, what does great look like around here? And have we got the clarity around that? So again, if we're trying to drive high performance, it's really important that we've reset the expectations in a new shape of organisation about what good looks like here, so that we can align recognition, we can align performance management, we can make sure that that aligns to the new goals of the organisation. Number 6 is about career paths. So if you have created a much bigger organisation, for example, or it's a bit more complex, this is about people finding their way in the new world. And okay, I'm still ambitious. My gut feel is there's some more opportunities that come out of this, but how do I navigate that? And can somebody help me kind of make that really clear? Again, after these processes happen, we often see comments coming through in employee feedback surveys around career paths, and I don't understand how I can progress my career here anymore. And so adding that into a people plan, even if it's not immediately, can really help you kind of get ahead. It can really help in terms of talent retention. Number 7 is being, and number 8, actually, these are kind of really, really linked. So just thinking about in your people plan, the psychological and the well-being impact of such a big change, of new leadership coming in, change of direction, just they're kind of losing their place in the world, and really making sure that you have wrapped some support around that, so that employees as they go through this period of change really understand how they fit in, how they can access support if they need it and if they're struggling, and that actually, despite the big number that you've released to the press about how much investment you've got, actually that employee wellbeing is still at the heart of the organisation, and that won't ever change. And that psychological safety plays into that. So, and I guess it plays into number 1 as well. This is about really making sure that as much as you can, as quickly as you can, creating that safety for employees around the fact that, if you can, their jobs are safe, and, this is still a safe place for you to work despite all that change, and having that in the back of your mind as you're going through, giving them those opportunities to share their feedback or share their concerns, and creating trust wherever you can. Okay. So one of the other things that we do at TenSpace sometimes during these processes, when the stakes are really high, is starting to really get into some detail about employee experience of some key areas during these transactions. So I've just put some examples of how that can look. So sometimes we will follow like a focus group, for example, during checking in every 3 months, say, during a transaction for the kind of the first 12 months. And that'll help us to identify where engagement's rising, where it's falling, how employees are feeling during that time, and really kind of building up some feedback and data. But that can be really great data, because you can really understand the ebb and the flow of employee experience as you go through. We'll often have a focus on key talent. So often during transaction processes, when I was doing due diligence, I'd walk away from that initial meeting with a list of people that were absolutely critical to the success of that business. And the success of that acquisition. So that then makes sense for us to have like laser sharp focus on that group of talent, to understand how their engagement levels are rising and falling, and how they're doing, and we can then head off any risk as we go through that. Another example, onboarding experiences, really tracking particularly if you are going through investment and that investment has been used to bring new talent into the organisation, and that's happening at a pace, we'll really start to focus on that and onboarding experience with new starters, really getting into some detail about what that looks like to make sure that we're optimising that, and that we're not going to start to see kind of early talent coming in and then leaving again, and we're kind of shooting ourselves in the foot with a leaky bucket. The other area that we'll look at, and I'll come on to this in a little bit more detail on the next slide, is leaders' experience. So really recognising those leaders as change agents in the organisation, and have they got everything that they need to deliver effectively? So I guess the point of kind of, it's really important to be thinking about employee engagement overall during this time, because like I say, that can higher employee engagement leads to higher performance, that leads to higher retention. But sometimes to really get this right, we might need to go into a micro level around individual employee experiences, or journeys as we call them, to make sure that those touch points that are going to be really, really critical, we're absolutely getting it right. So I just mentioned about leaders and using leaders as change agents. And I think sometimes this can be overlooked, the importance of using leaders as change agents in these types of transactions. So where we see that we can add value in terms of if you think about what we're asking leaders to do during these times is lead people through change, which is a skill set of their own, but also we're expecting them to be engaging their teams. So it's really important that they are personally engaged themselves, because they can't pour from an empty cup. So often we'll ring fence kind of leaders as a specific group that we're keeping an eye on, because we need them to be like fully charged and fully loaded so that they can go and pass the engagement down throughout the rest of the organisation. So it's really important that they are personally engaged. We need to understand what engagement topics are impacting them then. So, are they worried about their pension? Are they worried about losing their place on the board? What is it that they're concerned about, and how can we address those? So again, we can get them in the best place personally, so that they can be those change leaders, change agents that we need them to be. Have they got the skills needed to drive change? Like I said, managing change is a skill in itself, and not all leaders have done that before, and not all leaders have that skill set. And in the past, we would sometimes need to do some kind of coaching or mentoring, or even a quick bit of kind of change management training, in order to kind of supercharge those leaders to support them through leading and driving change. It's really beneficial for them to have kind of knowledge on engaging and supporting the team. So this, that they understand how important employee engagement is, and how high up their agenda that needs to be, and that they've got the kind of the data and the insight that they need in order to understand how engaged their teams are. An understanding, if we can, about where you think people are on that change curve, and understanding about the change curve in general, and understanding that if an employee has taken their foot off the pedal, for example, that just might be where they are personally on that change curve, and that it isn't forever, and how those leaders can help, coach and manage them out the other side. They definitely need to be informed and supported, and often in processes that I've done in the past, I've informed and supported them first, so that again they can go and do that and cascade that out to their teams. They need to know how to access support if they really need it. The EAP or the support from senior leadership teams, that should be at their fingertips, and that's for them personally to support them through it, but also to help their teams as well. They need to be up to date, and they need to feel connected to the wider organisation. So, if you are now part of a larger organisation, one of the things that you can and should be doing, I think, during these early days, is helping them make wider connections in the organisation, to help them find their place in a wider organisation more quickly. And if you can help facilitate that that will speed up their change curve. I guess 9 and 10 are a bit connected here, really. So often the leaders will really benefit from having a really clear idea of what their future is. And I know that you can't always share that, but where and if you can, sharing and understanding about this is the future of your role, it's secure, it's safe, if you can say those words, obviously. If not, don't make it worse by saying that. But making them feel kind of safe, secure, so that they can support their teams from a position of safety and security. They can provide that reassurance for their team, and that they can kind of talk to their teams about the future with the knowledge that their future is safe and secure. So some quick ways to help leaders: don't neglect spending time with them. Make sure your one-to-ones are in with them, and that they're likely to be more important than ever. Make sure that you're resetting their goals and their career objectives, and that they really understand how they can contribute. Keep an eye on their engagement data. Like say, often in surveys we'll pull out leaders specifically to make sure that we really understand what's going on with that population, because we understand how critical they are. And then really consider additional coaching and learning and support for them whilst they're going through this really critical time. So kind of coming to last couple of thoughts then. So thinking about long-term success. So I've seen more than once where an acquisition project has kind of lasted a couple of months to get through, the TUPE and then the initial change period, and then kind of, they're off. And actually, we know that those acquisitions are more likely to fail much further on than that. We'd always say, make sure that you are really following engagement and that acquisition process for at least 12 months, and really making sure that you understand what's going on in that with engagement and with your talent in that team for at least 12 months, if not longer. And the more data and insight that you can build up from a people decision-making perspective, the better. You really, if you can, that will really help to limit your risk and really help to kind of maximize performance and maximize your success. So some key takeaways then, bit of a summary. So engagement is critical for success. I think I've probably made that point. Consider change management as a process and as a skill. Really focus on employee experience, where you really need to supercharge employee engagement, really dip into individual employee experience and really kind of focus there if you need to, in order to kind of build that back up to overall employee engagement. Make sure you're staying connected to the people. So make sure that on a regular basis you understand what's going on in those teams, you understand what's landed or what hasn't, or what's going on, what the gossip is, I guess. Really make sure that you're supporting your leaders as change agents, and that you're calling them out as that, and that they have that support right around them. And then make sure that you're keeping on tracking and ensuring that you are making kind of long-term impacts on engagement and performance. You're getting off to a really great start, and then you're kind of keeping that going longer term. So if you felt like I've rushed over some of this, or you want some more detail, here's some ways that you can get in contact with me.
So how can leaders effectively communicate changes and updates to employees during these times?
Yeah, I think I said at the, hold on, let me stop sharing my screen and I can look at you. So I think I said earlier, like partly this is about like over communicating almost, so really over egging it. So, using those traditional channels, written feedback, pulling people together as much as you can. I know that's much harder in kind of hybrid remote working now, but if you can and you've got the option to pull people together, this is a time when people will really appreciate that connection. And more than just kind of sending out a message and hoping that it's landed, where you can really following up with people on an individual basis to make sure it's landed. This is communication that happened. How did that feel to you? I just want to make sure that you got the message, and really making sure that those messages are landing, because it's so easy to miss stuff in such a busy you know, a busy time, particularly anything that is really, really critical that impacts on T's and C's, or, you know, on an individual person, you really do need to be doing that face to face. You need to be kind of looking in the whites of the eyes and making sure that they've really heard that message.
That's great, thanks. I think we touched on the role that company culture plays during these times, but how can it kind of be like maintained or adapted?
Yeah, so it's one of the really tricky things, particularly about acquisitions and mergers, where in an acquisition situation, you've got a smaller organization that's been acquired by a larger organization. Often it's the culture of the organization that's made it really special, and it can be a really tough gig to protect that culture, or to kind of support to evolve it in order to create a new place that is really respectful of the old place that they were. And I think I've kind of just used that respect word. That's definitely the place at the starting point of respect where everybody's come from, respect where they are today, and then look to, if you absolutely have to, and there's no harm in different businesses having different cultures because they get things done differently, but if you really do have to kind of merge cultures, doing that very slowly, very respectfully with everybody involved, and not expecting things to change overnight. And then, you know, I've seen it where it was expected that culture change would happen instantly, and then there was performance metrics that were linked to the culture change, and so everybody failed them because the culture hadn't shifted, and we kind of, it was never gonna, the success was, you know, it's nobody was set up for success in that scenario, I guess. So yeah.